About 20 students, myself included, from my university, did a study abroad program in France last summer. We were spending a week in Paris before going to the town where the university was located. Most of the group got a group flight deal to Paris through the university, others flew separately. The only requirement was that we had to be in Paris by the day we had to leave to go to our university. Most of us had arrived by the third day into our Paris trip. Except for my friend Amanda. Naturally, we were all worried about her because her phone wasn't working. She had to update us from Facebook whenever she could get free Wi-Fi, which wasn't very often. Her flight had been delayed about 6 times already. Another day passed, still nothing from Amanda. We're all freaking out at this point since her phone wasn't working, we couldn't even contact her. The 5th day rolls around, still nothing. We all had a scheduled bike tour of the city that morning and a boat ride on the river that afternoon, so we didn't return to the hotel until about 7 that evening. When I got in, Amanda was asleep in our room. We were assigned roommates. Of course, I woke her up and asked her where the hell she had been. She told me that when she finally got to the airport, she was exhausted and broke. She had multiple layovers. And had basically spent all her on-hand cash on food, plus her bank card wasn't working. For those of you unfamiliar with Charles Airport, it is fucking massive. Unless you have a map or understand French completely, you will get lost. So she gets there, lost, broke, tired, hungry, and carrying like 3 big-ass bags, sitting inside the terminal. She said this good-looking guy walked up to her and started talking to her in perfect English. "You look tired. Do you need a taxi to your hotel?" Red flag number 1. What taxi driver gets out of his cab and walks into the airport to find a rider? Not thinking, she says. "Yes, thank you so much, I'm exhausted." He smiles at her and grabs one of her heavier bags and tells her to follow him. She does, and he leads her to this elevator. Red flag number 2. She was already on street level from where all the taxis depart. She gets inside and he hits the button for the basement level. He gets on the phone before the elevator opens and starts speaking in French, which he couldn't really understand because it was slang. She starts freaking out though when the doors open. It was a service deck meant for employees of the airport or something. Not for passenger parking or taxi pickup. It was damp and dark and, as she said, something literally out of a horror movie. The guy gets out of the elevator first and turns to her smiling, "Allons y. Let's go," in French. She takes a few steps and sees in the far corner of the deck, the trunk of this green unmarked van with no license plate open and a huge ugly-ass Middle Eastern guy step out of the driver's seat. At this point, she realizes she's in trouble, but she doesn't want to alert the smiling guy that she's about to get the fuck out of there. There's no one in sight, so screaming would be useless, but the lift door is still open. She quickly placed one of her bags in the middle of the lift entrance and told Smiley Guy that she needed her wallet that was in the bag that he was carrying. He looks at her sternly for a minute but walks over to her and hands her the bag. She told me that she pushed him down onto the ground with the weight of the bag and got back onto the elevator as fast as she could. He got up and was bounding after her. She said, "Girl, I hit every goddamn button on the elevator panel." The doors closed as soon as he reached her, and she could hear him banging on them as she was going back up to street level. She got to the taxi pickup lane and started bawling. A police officer approached her. She told him what happened and he drove her to the hotel. On the way, he told her that the men were likely linked to a sex trafficking ring and were approaching young women inside the airport who had tags on their luggage indicating they had come from the United States, assuming that American women were more trusting. I owed my good friend a favor back in high school, so he asked me to pick him up and his mother and little brother from the airport and drive them to their new house one weekend. They had been out of the country for several months and were in the process of moving again, so they rented this piece of shit house in the middle of a really bad neighborhood, which I suppose just served as a place to store their crap. I waited at the airport for them as their flight gets delayed for over 3 hours. Around the time they land, we pack up their bags, and it's almost 4 a.m. I'm exhausted, but I have to drive them to their house about 45 minutes away, then travel another hour back home. I mentally brace myself for a long trip and drank a Red Bull to give me a jolt of energy. As I'm pulling out of the airport parking lot, a small dark blue car pulls behind us. No big deal. I barely noticed it, and it stayed a ways behind. However, I noticed after I've made several wrong turns, none of us had GPS, and they were giving me directions from memory, and corrected my course that this car is still cruising slowly but surely behind us. I think to myself it's a weird coincidence, but took a mental note of it. Eventually, we get closer to their neighborhood and thus closer to a really bad part of town. We pull up to a red light, and I check my rearview mirror. 2 men. One had a bigger silhouette and the other kept shaking his head like he was trying to get a crick out of his neck. Now they have my full attention. Why the hell are they still behind me? For some strange reason, I'm hoping that this was just a stupid coincidence and my sleep-deprived brain is causing me to become paranoid. Until they followed us into the neighborhood. No fucking way. I say loudly enough to wake my sleeping passengers. I fill them in and they shrug it off, but I'm not taking any chances. Hold on to your butts, I tell them. We pull up to a stop sign and I suddenly gun my SUV. I begin whipping around turns, and sure enough they are trying to keep up. I quickly and repeatedly change streets trying to evade them. Another oncoming car causes them to slam their brakes behind me, allowing me to pull ahead and lose sight of them. Once that happens, I take a few more turns to lose them. It was a big neighborhood and pull into a random driveway and kill the engine. A minute later the car comes roaring down the street. The whole family is on edge, now telling me to just head home. I tell them to give it a second. The car comes roaring back down the street faster than before. I waited until I couldn't see their lights or hear their engine. Before I turned mine back on and continued to our destination, many pats on the back from the family. We eventually got to their house and brought all their bags in with no hassle. They were dead tired, but I decided to stay up and watch the house until it was light to make sure that those guys hadn't somehow found my car again. I left around 8 a.m., ready to be back in my bed to sleep. I don't know, my friend. Any more favors? Just this past summer, my younger sister and I went to visit family and friends out of state. My sister at the time was 16 and I'm 18. Just for some reference, my sister and I look very alike, but a lot of the time I get that she looks way older than me, like in her 20s. She's got a good 5 inches on me. Both of us are very loud and obnoxious, especially when we're together. We arrive at the local airport and my parents of course freak out and worry and then send us off. We went to our local airport, which is pretty small in comparison to the size of the city we live in. My sister and I find our gate and we had at least an hour before because our flight kept getting delayed due to an emergency landing our plane had to do for someone on board. We were just sitting around, literally off on our own. The airport really isn't big at all. Once you get through security, you make a left to where some gates are on our right, and to where the other gates are, and they have a few shops and restaurants in between these gates. We were at the closest gate possible to where all the restaurants were located, and there had to be like 3 other gates down past us, gate B and C, and obviously we were at A. So we're sitting alone, our flight really didn't have many other people, and we were plus other seats. And I'm sitting on the floor charging my phone watching Netflix and my sister is on a chair next to me doing the same. Some weird older guy just sat right across from us. Mind you, all the other fucking seats around. The dude himself reminded me of the murderer from The Lovely Bones, except way skinnier, like oddly skinny. So me and my sister are doing small chat in between watching our shows. And we keep hearing the announcements about our flight and we're both cracking jokes and making comments like we always do, just messing around. Almost every single thing we say this guy laughs at. I mean, I know when we're together we're pretty funny and he would laugh at things like, "Do you want water?" Or, "Well, this is taking a while." Like not even remotely a joke. I personally am a very alert person and get paranoid easily, especially since I read these stories so often, like I'm always aware of my situation. So I kept my eye on this dude as he kept watching my sister and I, mostly my sister. I'm on the phone watching Netflix when all of a sudden my sister texts me and says, "I think this guy is taking pictures of me." I was taken aback and a little shocked. I texted back, "Are you sure?" And she said yes. That's when my full crazy sister mode went out. My sister and I are extremely close. I would give my life for her and I don't put up with any shit. Neither does she, and she was very feisty, but I could tell she was scared. As soon as I looked up to give this guy a piece of my mind, he just got up and left. He looked like he was about to shit a ton of bricks. I turned to my sister asking her what happened, and she said she was on the phone and looked up to see him with his phone tilted right at her. I said, well, maybe he wasn't taking pictures, but she said she could tell just based off the way he was acting, like a teenage girl who's trying to secretly take a picture of a cute boy or something and isn't really being discreet about it. After talking to her about it, I was angry. Who would be taking pictures of a 16-year-old girl? I got up and walked down the gates the direction the guy went in. I saw him leaning up against the bathroom door next to the men and women's bathroom. I went into the women's bathroom trying to act inconspicuous. I shit you not, as I was entering the bathroom I peeked at his phone screen and my heart dropped. It was a zoomed-in picture of my sister's face. It was unmistakable. He quickly looked up to make eye contact with me, stashed his phone in his pocket, and darted into the men's bathroom. I immediately returned to my sister. I told my sister and we immediately texted our mother, who freaked the fuck out, telling us to inform the employees there and to find a security guard. We continued to wait for him to return from the bathroom, but he didn't, so we held off from telling security. The weirdest part besides him taking pictures was when me and my sister boarded the flight. The man did not. He didn't return to our gate and wasn't even on our flight, so he was just sitting across from us taking pictures of us for literally no other reason than being a weirdo. In May, I was going on a trip to Jacksonville, Florida. We had to stop in the Twin Cities. So while my grandparents and I were waiting for 3 hours, I decided to go and get pizza and tea. Now I'm not familiar with the Twin Cities airport, mainly because all the times I've been there I was fairly young. I ordered a tea from this kiosk-looking thing and a piece of Hawaiian pizza from the place in front of it. I sat down to eat and got out my phone and decided to check my email and go on Tumblr. About 10 minutes afterwards, some guy who sort of looked like Shaggy from the live-action Scooby-Doo movie comes and sits down in the seat in front of me, just staring at me. I told him to mind his own business, and he just said, "I just can't help it. You are so beautiful and I would love to show you around." I told him that I was a minor. His response, "No one has to find out. Come on, I have a dog you can have." After that sentence, I ran off into the nearest washroom and thought about what to do. Maybe he won't realize I ran into the washroom, I thought to myself. I can just go tell my grandma about what happened and she'll ruin him. Needless to say, I thought wrong. I walked out of the washroom, only to be greeted with that nasty hippie face of his. "Where did you go? Come on, Mom's worried about you." I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. "Oh, don't be silly, my darling little sister, Mom's waiting for us, come on." I realized what he was doing, and so I decided that the best thing to do was scream and say, "Get the fuck away from me." He gestured for me to quiet down. I stomped on his foot and ran off. I immediately informed security, and they escorted him out of the airport. So I'm a 20-year-old male, and I flew to India last November to meet a few family members. It was my first time flying on my own to India, and despite what family would tell me, I wasn't at all worried since I can speak and understand Hindi, although quite badly. Also, I looked like I could pass for an Indian, which I thought would help me blend in. I landed at around 2 a.m. and after landing at Mumbai International Airport, I had to catch a quick airport coach to take me from the international to the domestic airport. Standard procedure, although I found it a bit strange for such a busy airport to have such a system, I managed to make my way onto the coach. Now I know you must be thinking that the coach must be fake, but it wasn't the coach. I managed to get to the domestic airport just fine, and as I was waiting to disembark, I saw some people dressed in airport gear checking people's boarding passes. So, I held my pass to show the guy, and as he looked at it he gave a perplexed look. He scanned my pass again and stated that my flight wasn't due to depart for 4 hours. This is true, but I thought I'd chill at the airport anyway. He said that I'd have to take a taxi and go back to the international airport as they would not let me go into the domestic unless the departure was less than 2 hours. I obviously wasn't going to pay for a taxi back to the airport, and didn't understand why the airport wouldn't let me in. However, after thinking about all the weird procedures Indian airports have had so far, such as having to collect my bags at Mumbai airport and check them back in the same place, disorganized queuing everywhere, get a damn coach to and from the same airport, and the dim lights at the domestic terminal, I thought this may be another one of its irritating quirks. I agreed with the guy and walked with him to the car park. He was asking me where I was from and what I was doing in India. Just some friendly banter, I thought, but I was too tired and shy to even attempt to speak to him in Hindi. I kept telling him I'm not paying for the taxi and I have no money on me, just to make sure he wasn't going to scam me. He kept nodding and took me to the taxi he said I should take. Now, from watching Bollywood films, I know how Mumbai taxis look. They're yellow and black and are a distinctive model. This taxi was a normal silver-colored car with not even an ounce of credibility to pass as a taxi in Mumbai. Surrounding the taxi were a bunch of eerie-looking guys, all looking at me with a straight face. Feeling a bit awry, I backed away a bit while they were talking to one another. And they were saying stuff like, "He's some sweet goods, we'll have fun with him, you brought a good one, I'll be sure not to let him go." Aghast, I started sweating and shaking. I know people back home have said I act a bit camp and apparently unintentionally act flirtatious, but I had no idea that a bunch of Indian guys would have any interest in me apart from maybe getting some money. I was completely speechless and had no idea how to get out of the situation. The guy had my boarding pass and the car door was open. Then I had an idea. I said to the guy in English, "Can I just quickly buy a coffee? I've been parched for so long." He stated that the police at the door of the airport wouldn't let me in no matter how much I tried, and the best thing was to get into the car. I insisted that I just try to get in as I was really thirsty. And my voice started croaking, out of fear originally, but thankfully it could be passed as thirst. His friends told him to give me my boarding pass back and let me try it out. He gave it back and made me promise I'd come back after the coffee. I obviously obliged and gave him a cute smile as I snatched the pass and power walked it to the terminal. Of course, I didn't want to act too alarmed as they could have easily ran up to me and tackled me. In addition, the police could have been in cohorts with them and refused me access. Thank you, Indian News. So I made my way to the terminal and showed the policeman my boarding pass. He had a look and I asked him if I was allowed to enter the terminal just to make sure. He said, "Of course, your flight departs from here," and directed me to the departures lounge. I've never felt so thankful in my life. I breathed a sigh of relief as I hightailed it up to the escalator and passed the security check to make sure the gang wouldn't be let in. It was about 4 a.m. at this point, and all I could think of was what would have happened if I couldn't understand Hindi, and went into the taxi. To this day, I shudder at the thought. My only regret is not informing the police when I was let in. I think nerves did get the better of me, and I felt distrust towards everyone. Plus, Indian police officers wouldn't have done much to help the situation. Probably would have told me to keep calm and carry on. In January, I went to Washington, D.C., with some very close family friends. Coming from a town of about 11,000 people and never having been to a city even close to D.C.'s size, I was scared out of my mind that I'd get pickpocketed or mugged or something. TV had led me to believe that big cities like this had absolutely packed streets that were difficult to walk on, resulting in regular occurrences such as these. Needless to say, I was relieved when the trip ended without any such incident. As a DC airport, our 6 a.m. flight was delayed 3 or 4 times due to weather. By the time we finally got to the Denver, Colorado airport, it was around midnight, preventing us from driving the rest of the way home that night as we had originally planned. I refused to pee on airplanes unless absolutely necessary, so when we landed, I had to go. So I, along with my friend's mom, who also had to go, went to the restroom. When I came out of the stall, I noticed a security lady was now standing beside the door. I had heard no other footsteps come in the completely empty restroom. My ears were actually quite alert because the empty airport freaked me out. So this confused me a bit, but I just smiled at her and washed my hands. Approximately 10 seconds later, a toilet flushed. Instead of my friend's mom, a creepy-looking man with a black sweatshirt on, hood up, emerged from the stall. At the sight of the airport employee, he lowered his head and quickly walked out of the restroom. She followed him out saying, "This has clearly marked a woman's restroom." At the time, probably most due to sleep deprivation, I didn't think much of it. But the next day it really dawned on me. A man wearing a black sweatshirt with the hood up. In a woman's restroom, which was marked as such with quite an enormous sign. It's midnight and the airport is practically deserted. Plus he entered the restroom without a single sound, which for me was the worst part. I don't recall hearing any footsteps or extra sounds of urination or anything like that, so I honestly don't think he even used the restroom at all, rather just pretended by. I repeatedly mentally thanked the security guard for seeing this. I very well could have been kidnapped, murdered, raped, who knows. He easily could have jumped me. I hadn't even looked up until the security guard spoke to him. But the second I did, I got a very creepy vibe from him, and he very notably tried to avoid making eye contact. I have to preface this story by saying I was a really smart kid when I was little. At 18 months, I knew every word to the bare necessities from the Jungle Book and would perform it for my mom's coworkers. I don't think anyone ever taught me what to do in a situation with a stranger, just not to talk to them. I also have to say that when I was little, around 3 to 4, my mom let me cut my hair really short like a boy's. And everyone mistook me for one because I refused to wear anything girly. Also, like small children, I wasn't a good listener. For some reason, my grandma took me to the airport with her one day when she was watching me. I can't remember if my parents had gone out of town or if we were picking up someone else, and she had to bring me because it was her day to watch me while my parents were at work. Regardless, this was before security in the airports were super tight. So we were headed to a gate to pick whoever it was up. Or maybe we were just getting out in the main airport and it seemed like we were headed to a gate because I was so much smaller, so everything seemed bigger. Forgive the lack of memory, I was little. I do distinctly remember, however, that my grandma scolded me for running ahead of her and told me not to do it again. 5 minutes later, I'm at it again. I ran down a small flight of stairs, maybe 3 or 4 steps at most, and was suddenly swooped up by a very large man. I remembered that he smelled funny and that he had a really scraggly beard and blonde hair and really creepy eyes. He then starts to rush off with me, and I remember being very calm about the whole thing because in my mind my grandma was right there and she wouldn't let anyone hurt me. Well, she came tearing after this guy faster than I've ever seen her move. And she's yelling at him to put me down and whacking at him with her purse, and he said to her, "Lady, chill, this is my son, the kid you're looking for must have ran off." That's when little old me pipes up and says, "I am not a boy and you are not my daddy, now put me down." The guy looked shocked out of his mind and slightly repulsed and promptly put me down and ran off. My whole family has talked this story to death. Is it possible this guy really thought I was his son? Was he just someone who made a mistake? Was he a pedophile who thought he had scooped up a little boy? As a whole, we tend to lean toward pedophile, mostly because of his behavior. He didn't say a word to me, just picked me up and tried to hurry off, And then, when it became clear I was a girl, he hightailed it out of there as fast as he could. If he was just a man who made a simple mistake, he probably would have stuck around and apologized to my grandma for frightening her and for snatching me. I'm a 20-year-old female, and this took place back in March. I was 19 years old at the time. It was the end of spring break, and I was returning to Texas from California. I had just spent my vacation with my sister who lives in San Francisco. Every college kid counts down the days until spring break, and my vacation had gone rather well. However, I was slightly okay with returning to the essays and research papers, because I miss my friends, my bed, and my cat, maybe not in that particular order. I was flying alone, something I don't like doing for multiple reasons, and had only one layover in Dallas. I don't like traveling alone because I've had some bad experiences, and I happen to look a lot younger than 20. Most often, people say I look 13 or 14 at the most. I've always hated this about myself, but I'm told I'll be grateful when I'm older. As of now, it's just immensely frustrating. The last time I was on a plane by myself, the attendant thought I was an unaccompanied minor named Taylor. I quickly assured her I was not the minor in question. The time before that, I was asked to move away from the emergency exit because you have to be at least 16 to sit there. Anyways, my boyfriend was picking me up from the airport and I was excited. I wore the pink members-only jacket he had bought for me and tried to look my best, which is difficult to do when traveling. When the plane arrived in Dallas, we had some really terrible weather and the turbulence was scary, but no matter, soon I would be on another flight to Houston. I took the train around to the C terminal and made my way to the gate, only to find that due to the torrential rain and lightning, my flight had been cancelled. I was crushed, but determined. I took my ticket to be exchanged for a later flight. It seemed many others had the same grievance and were opting to do the same. As I was standing in line, a friendly-looking older man came up to me and stood behind me. "Are you alone?" he asked me. Everyone seemed to be conversing with one another, complaining about the weather and pondering their options to get home. It didn't seem like a big deal, because strangers always seem to connect in situations like this one. We were all frustrated. I also felt safe in the crowded airport, so I answered him truthfully and continued to wait in the line. The man behind the counter said I was in luck, that there was only 2 seats left on another flight to Houston and that I could make it if I hurried. I rushed aboard the train to the A terminal to catch my new flight, and upon reaching the gate was faced with the same situation. This new flight was cancelled too. The man from before had followed me to the gate and was in the same boat. I exchanged my ticket for a later flight and resolutely marched myself to the new gate only to be told the same as before. This happened literally 2 or 3 more times because I didn't want to give up and really had no other options. The man shadowed me during the entire ordeal, and I didn't really find it strange. We were just 2 individuals stranded in an airport. The last gate I went to, I noticed he was still following me. He walks over to me and begins to chat about what awful luck we were having. Someone eavesdropping nearby suggests that I rent a car. I politely tell them that I am not old enough. The man smiles and says to me, "Well, I'm old enough to rent a car. How about this? I'll rent us one. You can sleep, and I'll drive." I look at him and the way he is staring at me scares me. I finally begin to feel that something is off. I respond, no, but thank you. I'm going pretty far off." His smile falters for a moment, then he suggests that he buy me some food. I am starving. I am tempted. I hesitate for a moment. But then I remember a book I had read about a girl who was stolen from the airport after a man drugs her coffee. This gives me the strength to deny my grumbling stomach and decline him again. He follows me. I don't know why. He's already told me he's going to rent a car and leave. He points to a Mexican restaurant and says, "Oh, how about that place?" He has this strange look on his face and is standing far too close to me. I shake my head and said, I told you, I'm really not hungry. Lie, big lie. I can smell something delicious and I almost give in, but my face does not betray my hunger and I keep my pace. Okay, what about burgers then? He looks a bit annoyed. This guy doesn't give up easy. I ignore him. This causes him to glare at me angrily. And then stalk away. I breathe a sigh of relief. I call my sister to tell her about him, not in a catty sort of way, just a, wow, that guy was persistent kind of thing. I sit onto a chair to think about my options. I feel pretty alone and worried. My latest ticket had me leaving at around midnight and it was 9 p.m. at this point. I had been in the airport since 5 p.m. If this last flight didn't work out, I had no clue what I would do. I had no money for a hotel and didn't fancy sleeping in a chair. The last time I fell asleep in public on a train in France, a lady attempted to steal my backpack. But that's another story. I look up about 30 minutes later to see the same man walking towards me. I tuck my legs up in my chair nervously and pretend to play on my phone. Still here? He asks. He seems to have cooled down. Just stare at him. He clears his throat and tries again. So I was thinking you could come stay at my aunt's house for the night. With me. That's where I'm staying tonight. It would be no problem. You don't want to be in this airport all night. All alone. I shake my head and say, no, I'm fine. Then turn my attention back to my phone. I didn't even make eye contact. I felt really uncomfortable. He tries to convince me, and I have to say no firmly several more times. He looks angry, really angry. His hands are clenched and his smile is obviously fake. It looks as if he will shatter his teeth if he clenches his jaw any tighter. I wonder to myself why he hasn't left the airport yet. Then I notice that his luggage is no longer with him. He was rolling it behind him and now he isn't. Where would he have put it if he hadn't left yet? And so much time has passed. Why is he back here? As I'm thinking all of this, he is just standing there, staring. After what feels like forever, he storms off again. I feel so anxious because of him that I grab my things and move to a different gate to wait. My phone was dying and I didn't want to be without it, so to charge it, I have to plug it into the outlet in the floor. I curled up in the aisle between the chairs to wait. My sister called about an hour later and I was telling her about how creepy the dark weather looked outside when I see him, again, walking around glancing here and there in search of me. I hunched down even further, but my pink jacket was like a beacon. He locked eyes at me and I looked down. My sister said to stay on the phone, so I did. Well, there you are, he says, not even acknowledging that I am in the middle of a phone call. I continue talking to my sister. When it becomes apparent that he isn't leaving and doesn't care that I'm on the phone, I finally look up. So you're still here? Look, you need to come with me. You can stay with me at my grandparents' tonight. They would love to have you. They don't mind me bringing you at all. Just come with me. I got chills. I don't know why, but something in his eyes told me he was lying. Lying through those shiny white teeth of his. You said you were staying with your aunt. His face dropped. It went from cool and collected to something else. Not even anger this time. And not defeat either. Almost like amusement. Something like the cat that ate the canary. He shrugs his shoulders like, I tried, but we both recognize that he was caught in his lie. The entire time my sister is saying hello, repeatedly, but I was sort of shocked by how indifferent he was to me catching on to him. I go back to my conversation and he says, and lets the thought trail off while walking away backwards, eyes still on me. I call my boyfriend and tell him about each exchange and he tells me to find a security guard to tell. I look around for one, but couldn't find one. It was creepy because I've never seen an airport so deserted. I end up just deciding to move again and lay down between two different aisles out of view. A boy my age walks by and asks, Why are you laying on the floor? And I respond a tad aggressively with, because I want to. He laughs and puts his hand up, the unspoken sign for, whoa, take it easy. I apologize for my gruffness and tell them that a man was making me nervous. He jokingly says he'll protect me, and because he seems harmless and I mention my boyfriend, I converse with him for a while. He tells me he saw me and wondered why the blonde girl looked so sad. A little while later, I am thankful I didn't brush off the stranger because I see the man again walking around. We made eye contact, but he didn't attempt to approach me because I was no longer alone. Maybe it was just some middle-aged man trying his luck at getting a girlfriend or something, but scaring someone isn't the way to do it. Even if he meant me absolutely no harm, he was too aggressive and angry. The fall semester of my junior year of university was spent studying abroad with my best friend in Florence. We had a blast exploring the city, checking out timeless works of art, partying every night, making new friends, and traveling the country. Before we knew it, 4 months had gone by and we were on the way to the airport for our flight home. The night before saw a huge snowstorm, something that is rare for Italy. The white-covered city sparkled divinely as we drove through, and I remember feeling incredibly bummed to be going home. Even though it was 5 days before Christmas and I missed my family, I wanted nothing more than to stay in Florence forever. That feeling lasted all of 20 minutes. The airport was complete chaos, and upon entering we discovered that our flight had been cancelled. Cue the waterworks from my friend for the duration of roughly 13 hours. Yes, 7 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. We spent in line to try to get on another flight. Finally, we were given tickets for a new flight, but that flight was leaving from Rome in 3 days. Since we handed in our keys to our apartment and all of our other friends had flown home the day before, we were completely stranded. My friend was a complete wreck at this point, terrified at the idea that we might not make it and was really no help in deciding what we should do. So I decided the best course of action would be to hop on a train to Rome and spend the next couple of nights in the airport. After 7 exhausting hours on the train, we finally made it into the Rome airport and tried to find a corner to claim and bed down in for the coming 2 nights. We found a small area between a handicap ramp and the wall. The railing for the ramp created a sort of barrier. And it made a nice, seemingly safe nook for us to squeeze ourselves into. Exhausted, we pushed our luggage into the back of the nook and lay our backs against them. After making sure my friend was okay, I covered myself with my jacket and promptly fell asleep. I awoke to the feeling of a tug on my foot, and thinking that someone had accidentally kicked my shoe while passing by, I shrugged it off and snuggled deeper into my jacket. Not 3 seconds later I hear a man whisper, "American, American." I felt the tug on my foot again. I jump to my feet and see my best friend with her jacket on and her luggage by her side standing next to a very handsome Italian man. He had salt and pepper hair and was wearing a dark suit with a champagne-colored tie. His mouth formed a dazzling smile, but his eyes weren't smiling with it. I looked at my friend quizzically, trying to figure out what was going on and why she was standing with him. Looking back at him, I noticed that he was glancing to his sides and at the guard near the exit about 40 feet from where we were standing. His behavior immediately set off alarms in my head, and I grabbed my friend's arm to pull her back away from him. He grabbed her other arm and started talking very fast, saying that he worked for the airport and the flights out of Rome were all going to be cancelled shortly, that he had a car and he could drive us to Naples and we could get a flight out of there. He said that my American friend had agreed to come with him and that I should too. American, it is safe with me. I glared at my friend and told him in Italian that we were not interested in his offer and that we would wait for our flight. With my hand still firmly gripping my friend's arm, I grabbed my stuff and made a walk away from the creep. He immediately moved into my way, blocking us into the nook. His eyes with no semblance of humanity fixed onto mine as he said, "American, you are coming with me." Being cornered is a strange feeling, and prior to this instance it had never happened to me before. My reaction was immediate and it felt raw, animalistic. Full of rage, or terror, or both, I lunged at this man, shoving both of my fists into his stomach. It definitely surprised him and definitely knocked the wind out of him because his knees buckled and he toppled to the floor, bringing my friend down with him. As soon as they hit the ground, my friend began screaming and the man scrambled to get up and away from us, but not before the security guard by the door got to him. In my adrenaline-filled state, I began repeating, "He's trying to take us, he's trying to take us," as the security guard knelt on the guy's back, keeping him there until other guards could assist him. When the man was secured, they left him off the ground to bring him to what I assume was the detainment room of the airport. As they lifted him, he looked directly at me with his empty eyes and fake smiled and whispered, "See you soon, American." As soon as he was out of my sight, I broke down sobbing. I was so exhausted and terrified and incredibly angry at the fact that my friend had agreed to go with this man, that she had thought it was a good plan to get into a car with this person that she had never met, and that she had put us in an extremely dangerous situation. When I confronted her about it, her only excuse was that she wanted to make it home in time for Christmas, if she had gone with him. I don't think she would have ever made it home for another Christmas.